Hey guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed. Now last week we took a look at the CZ BREN 805, which was the first generation in their modern rifle series. So of course this week we're going to be taking a look at the second generation, the CZ BREN 2. Now this includes a lot of improvements over the original 805 BREN, primarily in the areas of ergonomics as well as the weight and just plain simplification of the system. So let's go ahead and talk about the history going into the BREN 2 and then get a good look at how I have mine set up. And real quick, I want to give a big thanks to the Echo Valley Training Center in Capon Hill, West Virginia. I've done a ton of shooting there over the years. I did my accuracy testing for the BREN there as well. So if you guys are looking to do competitions, night vision shooting, anything like that in the DC metro area, check them out. So we're not going to go too deep into the history of the 805. Check out my video on that if you want to get a little bit more in depth on it. But essentially the story with the BREN 2 starts with the 805 and it being a little bit more complicated, heavy, and just not as good as it could have been. So CZ went back to the drawing board, took the basic design of the 805 that they had, and this was back right after the 805 was adopted back in 2011 by the Czech military. So they were already looking at improvements. So they took that design, they ended up cutting out a lot of weight, and they made some ergonomic improvements. Some of the biggest ones were the charging handle. So the original 805 BREN had a reciprocating charging handle. So to compete with other modern rifles, they went to a non-reciprocating system so that charging handle would stay forward. Some other design changes they made were to the gas system with a lot of simplification. So they ended up making it more similar to something like an HK416 with less parts. The original 805 BREN had a pretty heavy piston system that had incorporated springs and just pretty complicated for what it was. So they simplified that, which cut out some more weight. And then another area they cut out some weight was with the handguard. So the original 805 BREN had a handguard which was significantly longer than the BREN 2. So they cut that back a little bit in the US variant, which I'll talk about in a little bit. They also made it modular so you could swap out the handguard, which you couldn't do with the original 805 BREN. They also made some changes to the lower receiver, made it lighter as well, changed out the trigger. So across the board, they made some pretty major improvements to the design. Another major area of improvement was the bolt catch bolt release on the BREN 2. Now in the original 805, it didn't have an actual dedicated bolt release. You only had a button to hold the bolt open when you pull back on the bolt. So the only way to charge the rifle while the bolt's locked back is to pull back on the charging handle. Now with the 805, they didn't add just one, but two different ways to release the bolt mechanism with a dedicated system. So that was a major ergonomic improvement over the original 805. And now that CZ had this improved design over the original 805, they had to find some customers for it. And the first major customer was actually the Czech military. So they were already using the 805 at this point as their standard military rifle. However, they did see all the design improvements that CZ was able to incorporate into the BREN 2 and figured that this would actually be a worthwhile upgrade to the 805. So in 2015, they ordered about 2,600 CZ BREN 2s to supplement the 805s that they already had in service. And by 2020, the Czech military had really been having some fantastic luck with the BREN 2, and the troops really liked it. Everything was going well with it. So they decided within the next 5 years, so between 2020 and 2025, they would be phasing out the BREN 805 and replacing it completely in combat units with the CZ BREN 2. Now the customers for the BREN 2 doesn't stop with just the Czech Republic. This actually saw a lot of adoption with other countries, some in small numbers, some in larger numbers. One of the more famous adoptions was the French GIGN, so their Specialist Counterterrorism Group. They adopted the CZ BREN 2 in 7.62x39, which was kind of an interesting choice. But they really wanted that heavier 30 caliber cartridge. For whatever reason, they thought that would be a better fit for their counterterrorism forces. And the last country that we absolutely have to talk about is Ukraine. So most of the combat footage you're going to see that includes BREN 2s is going to be from the Russo-Ukrainian War. So a lot of these were either given or purchased by the Ukrainians to equip certain forces within their military, primarily their international legions, which are made up of volunteers from multiple different countries from around the world. So this is one of the primary rifles that you're going to see in their hands, and that actually makes this one of the most combat-proven rifles, or at least modern rifles, of the last 10 years, because these things have seen a ton of use over there, and most of the feedback has been pretty good on them. So the Ukrainians also decided that they wanted to domestically produce the CZ BREN 2, so they did make a deal with CZ to start tooling up factories to actually manufacture it in-house for them. Now, the story doesn't stop with the CZ BREN 2. CZ kept looking at the design for the BREN 2 and probably incorporating some lessons learned and some potential improvements from the Russo-Ukrainian War. They ended up coming out with the CZ BREN 3. So that was announced in 2024, and it included a lot of improvements over the BREN 2. And that's going to be primarily with the handguard system. So this, in its military configuration, has basically a set handguard length. And you can swap out the side rails, but that's about it with it. Then the lower receiver is completely the same between the two, but they also did add more QD sling swivel points. And then they also made the barrel system a little bit easier to swap out, so you can change it between calibers, barrel lengths, all of that a lot easier than you can on the BREN 2. Additionally, they also added more steel parts to the internals of the receiver. So the BREN 2 is pretty much entirely aluminum, extruded aluminum in the receiver area. With the BREN 3, I think for longevity's sake, they were looking at adding steel rails into the receiver so it wouldn't be aluminum on steel contact, which might wear over the time, to give it a little bit more long-term durability. Now, one other version of the BREN that I'm going to briefly touch on is the CZ BREN 2 BR. Now, that is the 7.62 NATO version of the BREN 2, so it's just upsized, blown up a little bit to handle that heavier caliber rifle cartridge. Now, that hasn't seen a ton of adoption around the world at this point yet, and it's still pretty well insular to the Czech Republic. So, we haven't seen that yet on the US civilian market, and we don't know if we're actually going to get it. But the Czech military is already looking at adopting certain versions of the BREN 2 BR to include a precision rifle one, which is going to be replacing the Dragunov in some of their units. And the last piece of history we're going to talk about is the BREN 2's history on the US civilian market. So some people who already own BREN 2s in the US might be looking at mine and thinking that it looks a little bit different than what they have. And that would be true because this is a BREN 2S. Now, the modern ones that you're seeing on the US civilian market are the BREN 2 MS, which is a slightly different version. The 2S was the original imported version back in late 2018 when they brought in 300 rifles of 6 different configurations, and that's between the 2 calibers, so you have 7.62 by 39, which is what mine is, and 5.56 by 45. And in each of those calibers, they had 3 different barrel lengths. For 5.56, you had 14, 11, and 8, and for 7.62 by 39, you had 14, 11, and 9. Mine's a 14-inch barrel version of 7.62 by 39, and they brought in 50 of each of those variants of rifles. So those original 300 that came in were actually more of a test just to see if QC was working well on CZ's side and if they're ready to fully introduce the rifle into the US civilian market. And that went well, and then they ended up going with the BREN 2 MS, which had some changes for the US civilian market, which they thought that we would like. Now, the BREN 2S is pretty much exactly what the military adopted version of this rifle is. So where it has the fixed receiver length, where you just have the rail which goes all the way out to the front and it cuts off, and that's it. The BREN 2 MS ended up changing out that system where you had a handguard which you could swap out for different lengths and different manufacturers, which better fits what the US civilian shooter is looking for. So that was one of the main changes between the BREN 2S and the BREN 2 MS. Additionally, they changed some of the lightning features on it. So for the BREN 2S, they have some lightning cuts in the receiver here. On the Bren 2 MS, they end up having not any of the cuts taken out of the receiver, and they instead take that weight out of the top rail of the rifle. And that pretty much brings us up to date on the history of the CZ BREN 2. Now for the US market, the CZ BREN 3 has not been announced yet, so we don't know if we're actually going to be getting those in. That'll be a pretty major improvement, and I would absolutely love to get one to test out because I do think it solves some of the issues that I have with the BREN 2. Additionally, the BREN 2 BR, the 7.62 NATO version, is also not on the US market, so that's another thing that we're looking at potentially getting in down the line. But that's pretty much where we're at with it at this point. So let's go ahead, get in a close look at mine and see how I have it set up. All right, so looking at my setup, we're actually gonna have quite a lot to go over. So starting from the very front, I do have a chemo muzzle device on mine because I do run this gun suppressed. However, I will note on the 7.62x39 version, it does have a 1/2x28 thread pitch on it. So make sure whatever muzzle device you end up getting for it will allow a 30 caliber bolt to pass through it, because if not, you're going to have a very, very short range trip. Now moving back from there, the 2S does have a bayonet lug on it. These do use a proprietary bayonet, and I don't have one of those, but that's one of the cool military features on the original 2S series. In front of that, we do have our gas plug. This is a 3-position. This is actually something I sent to HBI Industries to have a 3rd pinhole drilled in it, but we'll talk about that later on. Moving back from there, you'll see I do have a Surefire Vampire flashlight on there. So this is both white light as well as IR. And that's because I do use this rifle quite a bit with night vision. And you can see up top here, I do have a full power PEC 15 laser. So this is one of my go-to night vision rifles. And in front of that, I have a Midwest Industries PEC sight. So I have iron sights which integrate pretty well with the PEC 15 at the front. Moving down from there, just have some cable controls that go to a mod button light for the Surefire light, as well as an M-LOK grip. Then we have our 7.62x39 BREN magazine, and moving up from there, we have our controls for the CZ BREN 2, and again, this is one of the major areas of improvement over the original 805 BREN. We have that magazine release in the same spot it is on an AR-15. Then inside of the trigger guard, we actually have both a bolt hold open and a bolt release. Mine has an aftermarket mod on there to kind of make it a little bit easier, which we'll talk about later on in controls. On the left side, you can see, or right side here, you can also see the safety selector, which is 45 degrees and very well placed. It is polymer, however, and then you can see I do have a lightning cut there for the 2S, which is not on the MS. Then there's also a slot on the right side for the charging handle, so it is reversible. As far as optics, I'm running a SIG Romeo 4 XT Pro, which is one of my favorite red dot sights when you're looking at something that's more or less comparable to an Aimpoint T2 for significantly less money. And then behind that, I have a Juliet 3X magnifier. So this is a micro small one, and it works very well with this Romeo 4 XT Pro. The iron sights on here, at least the rear iron sight, is essentially a copy of the Troy Industry sights, but it's very well made and it works very well. We also have a QD sling mount as well as a sling bar there for your typical sling. And then moving back, we have the stock. This is actually the stock from the BREN 2 BR, so the 7.62x51 variant. The original BREN 2 stock for this variant has kind of more of a waffle type texture on it, which is a little bit different. But this has 4 different positions and then also has a sling swivel cup on it. Moving down to the pistol grip real quick, you can see it does have a compartment in the bottom for storage as well as replaceable back straps. That's really all there is to see on the right side. Moving to the left side of the rifle, you can see up at the front again, we have my flash hider as well as that bayonet lug. Moving forward, you can see the marking on the barrel there for 7.62x39 as well as our gas plug. And again, that's 3-position. It is normal, adverse, and then typically it's going to be just a blank hole basically where there's the gas system is shut off. This one has been drilled for a suppressor setting though, so that works pretty well. And then moving forward there, we again have my PEC 15 up top here, as well as that mag pull grip, and then our non-reciprocating charging handle on the left side of the rifle. Again, that can be swapped over to the right side, and there's a mod button that goes to the flashlight, and then my Romeo 4 XT Pro, and that's going to be on a Scalarworks mount, which works incredibly well. And moving down from there, we can see the left side controls. And it does have a standard AR-15 style ping pong paddle. So that's in addition to the controls which are inside of the trigger guard. So it has two separate ways that you can release that bolt. And then additionally, it has a left side magazine release, and the safety selector is mirrored on both sides of the rifle. And then moving back, you can see again we have sling mounting points and then our stock here at the back, and it does fold to the side using that button right there. And that's basically all that we have to go over for my features. All right, so let's go ahead and kick off the ratings with accuracy, and I'm gonna give the Bren 2S a score of 2. So that's not very good accuracy, and that's because at 100 yards using 124 grain ATS North Macedonian, which is a place, ammunition, I was able to get a group size of about 4.4, just under 4.5 MOA. So that is not stellar accuracy out of this rifle. A little bit surprising considering it does have a free floated barrel. However, I will note that 7.62x39 is typically not an accurate cartridge, so you're not going to get great accuracy out of it with most platforms. And again, the ammunition being North Macedonian ATS ammunition, I'm not expecting stellar accuracy. However, I did get better accuracy with my other 7.62x39 rifles, the VZ58, as well as my Arsenal SLR 107 FR. So accuracy is definitely not a strong suit of the Bren 2. And next up, we're going to have Aftermarket, where I'm going to give the Bren 2 a score of 4. And man, there's actually quite a bit to go over in the Aftermarket category for the Bren 2. And I'm particularly looking at the MS model that most people are going to have. So the 2S isn't going to be compatible with Aftermarket MS handguards because this one has the fixed receiver length from the factory. But speaking on that, there's a couple of different companies that are making parts for the CZ BREN 2. Haga Defense makes a ton of different parts for the Bren 2. K&S Precision makes some parts. Lingle Industries makes some parts, as well as Neoteric Designs also makes parts. So some different parts options from each BI. The biggest things are going to be handguards. So there are multiple different handguard lengths depending on which version of the rifle that you have. So those are going to be mainly M-LOK handguards, but there are quite a few different options from them. As far as stocks go, there are a ton of different adapters for this. You have brace options. This started out as a pistol, as did all the 2S's. So you have brace options from SB Tactical and other options as well as far as braces goes. For stocks, you have ACR stock adapters. You have the Bren BR stock. You have the original Bren 2 stock. You have B&T, the B&T MBT stock adapters. They have those. They have a G36 stock adapter from Haga Defense, so that's another option. The new Haga Defense HDA3 stock, they make one specifically for the Bren 2. They also come from the factory with an end cap which accepts standard AR-15 buffer tubes. However, that doesn't fold, but you can put basically any AR-15 buffer tube and stock on here. And then Neoteric Designs also makes a retractable stock option, so kind of like what you see on the B&T APC. So that's another option there. And then as far as the lowers go, I believe it's Haga Defense, or excuse me, Lingle Industries for the 7.62x39 version of the Bren 2 makes an AK stock or AK magazine adapter, so you can swap this out to the Rock and Lock magazines for the AKM. So that opens up a million different options from your classic Bakelites to Circle 10. Whatever different AK magazine in 7.62x39 should work with that lower. However, if you do swap to that lower, you will lose your bolt release or your bolt hold open function on the rifle. So I personally see that as a bit of a downgrade over the original Bren magazine lower. You also have other lower options, as well as a aluminum lower that takes standard AR-15 triggers. You are limited in what different trigger groups that you can have because this does have a firing pin safety on it, so that trigger, the hammer for that trigger has to be able to overcome that safety to function correctly in the rifle. But you also have in that aluminum lower the option to add AR-15 style pistol grips as well, so there's a world of options there. There's different controls that you can get. You can get upgraded folding charging handles, aluminum charging handles, aluminum trigger shoes, flat trigger shoes, different safety selectors, aluminum safety selectors, different lengths. There are a ton of different options that you can add to this rifle. Now, one of my favorite ones is from Lingle Industries, and that's going to be in the trigger guard here. You can see I have this winged bolt release. For the original bolt release that comes with the CZ BREN 2, it is just inside of the trigger guard. That is not a design I really like because you have to have your finger in the trigger guard to drop the bolt, so there's potential safety concerns there. This mod places wings outside of the trigger guard so you can safely lock the bolt back or drop the bolt in an ACR style bolt release. So that's a pretty big improvement in my book. Another thing that you can get are replacing the gas plug. So HB Industries as well as K&S have different gas plugs for this. You have an optimized one from HB Industries, which just has a couple different adjustments on it. The one from K&S is a lot more adjustable with a ton of different things that you can really tune it into exactly the gas level you want for the rifle. So just giving how many options there are, this thing is almost the level of AR-15 with the aftermarket options. And the next thing we'll talk about is going to be the durability of the BREN 2, and I'm going to give it a 4 in that category. So overall, the BREN 2 is very well made. The polymer is well constructed, so I don't really have any complaints about that. It's this really interesting kind of fiber reinforced polymer that holds up really well, and I really don't have any complaints about it. The receiver itself is going to be extruded aluminum, and it's well made. And again, on the BREN 2, it is just aluminum versus the BREN 3 is going to be adding some steel components, which is going to enhance the durability over time even more. But I haven't had any real durability issues when it comes to the receiver on the BREN 2. The place I'm going to be dropping off that point is actually with the charging handle. So my original charging handle that I had with my BREN 2 actually broke, as far as there's a hook which kind of holds it forward while you're firing. So that's important for a non-reciprocating charging handle, because even if it normally stays forward, unless you have something to actually lock it in the front position, then just the momentum of the rifle will actually carry it back with it. It doesn't have a lot of weight to it, so it's not going to injure you at all or anything like that. But that hook, which is a MIMT part, broke off on my original charging handle, so it would move back and forth a little bit while I fired. I did contact CZ and they sent me a replacement charging handle for it, so I haven't had an issue since then, but I'm going to be dropping off a point for that issue. And next up is going to be ergonomics, where I'm going to give the BREN 2 a perfect score of 5. So let's go ahead and get into the controls on this. So starting from the front, we do have our gas regulator, and this is going to be 3 positions: normal, adverse, and then suppress on mine. Originally, that third position, instead of suppressed, was actually just a gas cutoff. I did have that drilled by HB Industries. So actually adjusting the gas system on this is incredibly easy because you just turn the gas plug. So it's actually easier than the BREN 805 where you had to manually hit a detent on it to be able to turn it. This one, you can just twist it, and it's very easy to adjust. So no complaints there. And then moving back, the next thing we're going to take a look at is going to be our charging handle. So you can see it is there. Right now I have it on the left side. However, you can easily move it over to the right side during disassembly. The stock charging handle, which is what I have on here, is very nice. It does have that polymer covering at the end. It is pretty short and compact, which I really don't mind at all, but it's very easy to actuate. So you just pull back on it to lock the bolt back, and again, it's non-reciprocating while you're firing. Now, looking at the controls on the left side of the rifle, we do have a standard AR-15 style ping pong paddle up there. So again, to drop the bolt, which is currently locked back, all we have to do is press in on that, and it'll send it home. Now, we also have our left side magazine release, which is right here. So pretty easy to actuate for all our lefties out there. And then we also have our left side safety selector, which is going to be 45 degrees. It is polymer. It is fairly short. However, it is very easily actuated, and I really don't have any major complaints about it. Now, moving over to the right side of the rifle, you can see our magazine release is in the same position it is on an AR-15, which makes it very nice and easy for pretty much anyone used to that platform to operate. And then we also have our safety selector on the right side of the rifle, which is perfectly mirrored to the left side of the rifle, so nothing really to go over there. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the bolt back again. so we can check out our bolt release here inside the trigger guard. Now again, this one has the Lingle Industries paddle on it, which makes it easy to actuate from outside of the trigger guard. The original one doesn't have these wings on it, so you have to come inside the trigger guard to release your bolt. This is a pretty big improvement in my books, just from the safety standpoint, but to drop the bolt, all you have to do is press down on that wing, and it'll send our bolt home. So that is a very nice design. And it's a lot like the ACR or the XCR with that paddle on there. Now moving back, the only other control we really have to go over is the stock. And this is a 4-position adjustable stock. I do have a Ranger band on there for my sling to keep that nice and neat. And if we look on the left side, we do have our button there. So if we press that in, we can fold our stock to the side. So it'll just swing around here. And then we have a little groove there, which locks underneath the bolt deflector, or the shell deflector there, and it is very solid. It's not going to come unlocked if you don't want it to. To put it back in place, all you have to do is pull down on it, swing it out, and it'll lock solidly back into place. And that's really all there is to go over for the controls on the BREN 2. And the next category that we're going to be going into is going to be maintenance, and I'm going to give the BREN 2 a score of 4. Now, when it comes to disassembly, the BREN 2 is actually incredibly easy to disassemble, and everything comes apart very easily. You're able to get into all the nooks and crannies in the receiver. It's fairly open, so you can get all the stuff cleaned out on that. It disassembles easier than the BREN 805, and something that's really important over the 805 is you can actually take apart the bolt carrier group. Now, on the 805, from the factory, the firing pin retaining pin is either a roll pin on the early models, which is difficult to remove, or on the later models is a pin that's actually pinned into place. So it's not easy to remove at all, and you're not supposed to remove it. You're supposed to just maintain it while assembled, wipe it off, and then oil it. With the BREN 2, they replaced the firing pin retaining pin with a standard one where you can easily remove it, so you can take your firing pin out, you can take your bolt out, you can clean everything off really well and re-oil it easily. And then if anything breaks on it, on the bolt, you can actually replace it versus that 805 where it's gonna be a much heavier task to be able to replace a bolt on it. Now the issue here, and where I'm gonna be dropping that point off, is the availability of OEM parts. CZ is awful at actually supplying parts for rifles. So if you break something on this, like a bolt, you're not going to be able to easily replace it from CZ. Now, I will say HB Industries is actually pretty good about having certain parts in stock for you to be able to replace. One thing is going to be firing pins, and then also extractors they have on their website, as well as certain springs from inside the rifle they do carry. So that might be your best bet on finding replacement parts. But again, CZ themselves, they're really bad at supplying that kind of stuff. And next up we have Modularity, where I'm going to be giving the CZ BREN 2 a score of 4. It is a really nice modular design. Like we talked about in the aftermarket section, there are a ton of stock options. They're easy to swap out, easy to replace. You got tons of options for different lower receivers that you can swap in to give you AR triggers, AR grips, stuff like that. Handguards on the 2MS model, again, is something that you can replace and that you can kind of tune to your liking depending on what you want. So there is a lot of modularity options with this rifle. One other thing is going to be barrel swaps. Now, you can swap calibers on the BREN 2. It should be fairly simple to do. There's just 2 screws on each side as well as on the underside. And then you can just, if you back those out, you can just pull out the barrel and then potentially put a new one in there. The issue is going to be with getting actual replacement barrels. CZ, again, is horrible about supplying parts, and there is only one run of replacement barrels ever sold to the US market, and that was several years ago, so of course those are all gone. I would love to swap this to 5.56 with an 11-inch barrel, but due to their lack of availability of barrels, that's not going to be possible. So it is built into the design, but due to CZ being CZ, you can't really get them. 4 caliber swap 2, it utilizes the same lower receiver. However, there is a magwell insert to go from 7.62 by 39 to 5.56 magazines, but that's easy enough to do, and you can actually get the magwell insert fairly easily. But overall, it is a very good modular design. One thing I did want to talk about was the magazines for the 7.62x39 variant of the Bren 2. So from the factory, it comes with these translucent polymer magazines. So this is probably the same polymer that they utilized for the early Scorpion magazines. And those had a history of breaking feed lips. I haven't heard that be an issue with the Bren magazines. But another option straight from CZ, and the one I would recommend, is going to be these polymer magazines. So these are non-translucent, but they do have a window in the back here to give you a shot counter on it. These are very well made and are every bit as good as Magpul magazines. So I would highly recommend picking up a couple of these for hard use situations. But these magazines are my favorite part of the 7.62x39 version of the Bren. And my biggest problem with AKs, if we take a look at a standard AK magazine here, so this is a Bakelite Russian mag, is the ergonomics on the magazine. So this is going to be a rock and lock mag, so you have that toe in the front as well as a lock in the back there that you have to use when inserting the magazine. Now for the Bren magazine, it is just straight up into the magazine well, like an AR-15, so that is a little bit easier to do in a stressful situation and when you're trying to be fast. Additionally, this has a bolt hold open notch at the back of the magazine here, so you do get bolt lock on an empty magazine. That is not something that you get with your typical AK mag. Yugo mags do lock the bolt open, but as soon as you pop the mag out, it will drop the bolt on you. So that is a major ergonomic improvement on the 7.62x39 Bren mags. Additionally, these are going to be a lot better than your AR-15 7.62x39 magazines, and that's just because this actually works very well with the tapered design of the 7.62x39 cartridge. So you have to have a pretty steeply curved magazine for it to be reliable. On AR-15 style magazines, you have to have this straight portion of the magazine up near the top to fit in an AR magwell. So that has to be several inches long to be able to insert correctly. On the 7.62x39 Bren magazines, you can see it curves actually pretty quickly after the top of the magazine, and that's because that's actually designed into the lower to allow this magazine to curve quickly, and that enhances reliability with 7.62x39. So it is one of the best improvements. I wish more AR-15 designs or like the 7.62x39 MCX actually utilize these magazines because they are my favorite part of the 7.62 rifle. Next up, we're going to be talking about price, where I'm going to give the Bren 2 a score of 3. Now, if you look online, you're generally going to be seeing these go for around $1,500 to $1,700. So that's fairly typical for a rifle like this. It does compete very well with more expensive offerings like the SCAR or maybe the HK416. So if you're looking for something in that kind of a category, this is a very, very good and fairly inexpensive option. Next up, we're going to be talking about shooting characteristics, where I'm going to give the Bren 2 a score of 4. So as far as the trigger goes, it has a very, very nice trigger straight out of the box. And it comes in weighing at about 3 pounds, 8 ounces, so incredibly light for a rifle. Almost too light for me in some situations, but it's nice, it's crisp, maybe feels a little plasticky and not as nice as the Bren 805 to some people, but I really like the trigger and I would not swap it out for anything else. Now, as far as recoil impulse goes, for the 7.62x39 version of the rifle, it's actually fairly heavy recoiling. That's going to be mainly due to the cartridge. 7.62x39 actually produces a fair amount of recoil, so you're going to be feeling it, especially in a rifle that is as light as this. So it's not going to be as fast on target as something like a 5.56 rifle. The 5.56 version of the Bren 2 will have a substantially better recoil characteristics just due to the cartridge. And from the factory, these are actually fairly overgassed, so that's also going to contribute to a slightly heavier recoil. Now, as far as suppressing this goes, I've utilized it both with my Saker 7.62, which is a full back pressure can, as well as my B&T SRBS 7.62, which is a reduced back pressure can. And I should talk about the gas plug first. So from the factory with the 2S, the original version, you only had a normal and adverse setting on it. The third setting on your gas plug was just a gas cutoff, so it would just turn off the gas system. HB Industries early on offered a service where you could send in your gas plug and they would properly drill it for the correct amount of gas with a suppressor And I used that service, I sent it in, and they drilled that third gas cutoff position with a suppressor setting. And when I got it back, it worked very well. 7.62x39 is not the most suppressor-friendly cartridge though still, especially since a lot of the ammunition is kind of disgusting and produces a lot of smoke. So it's still fairly heavy recoiling, and you still get a good amount of gas back with it. With the B&T SRBS can on there, this is actually very, very nice 7.62x39 suppressor host, so I don't really have any complaints there, and I would absolutely recommend going with a flow-through if you can with this rifle. And next up, we're going to be talking about reliability, where I'm going to give the BREN 2 a score of 4. Now, overall, these have reputation of being a very reliable rifle, especially in the 5.56 version. Now, for mine in particular, with the early BREN 2s that came in 7.62x39, they had issues with stovepipes and malfunctions, and mine had a couple of instances of that as well when I first got it. So there was some early fixes to that, the main one being HB Industries. If you sent them the gas plug and you had them drill it, which they did with mine, that helped with the situation. And then they also supplied a heavier piston spring, which I think is really what cured the issues I was having. So after I had that mod done to my rifle, I have not had a single malfunction with it. So that's the only reason I'm going to be dropping a point off. For the more modern rifles, CZ has been messing around with the gas system a little bit and getting it better tuned so it works better. And a lot of the issues that they had with reliability early on have been solved. So I would not be too worried about reliability. And particularly if you're getting it in 5.56, those never had any issues at all. And the next category is going to be weight, where I'm going to give the BREN 2 a score of 4. Comes in at about 6.8 pounds. So that is very, very lightweight for what this rifle is. And again, it's a huge improvement over the original 805, which was about a pound, a little over a pound heavier than this rifle. So they did cut back on a lot of the extra fat, the extra weight on the 805. And this is one of the lighter rifles on the market nowadays. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories, we come out with a score of 38 for the BREN 2, which puts it solidly into the A tier. And really the only thing that I had that really held this rifle back is the accuracy, and I didn't get good accuracy out of it, and again, that could have been due to the caliber more than anything else. But in all the other categories, it's pretty well balanced. It's a good rifle. This is actually one of my go-to rifles. This is my 7.62x39 go-to rifle, and that's why I have it set up with all the laser stuff and everything, because this is one of the guns I actually rely on. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about is how I think the BREN 2 does as far as coolness, and I think it belongs solidly up in the A tier. Now, it hasn't seen a lot of use in pop culture, so it's not in any movies, it's really not in any TV shows. The only video game I'm aware of is in Modern Warfare 3, the BREN 2 BR, this guy's big .308 caliber brother. That was in that game, but that's basically it. So pop culture really hasn't had any sort of an impact with the BREN 2. Where it does it for me is its real world use. So first of all, GIGN adopting this rifle as one of their options, that's pretty cool. So that's one of the premier counterterrorism teams in the entire world. So that's pretty cool use case. And then also the use it's getting in Ukraine right now. So you're seeing this in a bunch of combat footage over there. Again, they seem to be performing pretty well overall. So that's really where I think it ends up jumping up into the A tier is all the actual use that this is currently getting in conflicts around the world. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for our review on the CZ BREN 2. So thank you guys for checking this out, for looking at my videos, and for supporting the channel. Please like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. I got more stuff coming up in the future, so stay tuned for that. Thank you and have a wonderful day.